Evening, members. I think we're going live. It's 7 o'clock. So, actually, I'm going to take my own advice. So, right, before I open the meeting officially, can you just all make sure your phones are muted and your electronic devices? And any remote participants, of which there's quite a few tonight, just keep your mics off. Unless you wish to speak, please indicate. Hopefully someone will nudge me to point me that you're wanting to speak. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that staff may use body-worn cameras within the premises. Data captured during these recordings will be processed and retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy, and the meeting recording may be published on the Council's website. You're trying to catch me out with new wording here, aren't you? See, I do read it. Right, members accessing remotely, please use your SBC or KCC laptop. Otherwise, we may not be able to see and identify that it is you on the meeting. Okay, so welcome everyone tonight to the Extraordinary Economy and Property Committee meeting. And I welcome visiting members, as well as any members of the public who may be listening in. I'm going to advise the following. So here tonight we have remotely attending Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhoods, Emma Wiggins. We've got Head of Place, Joanne Johnson, sat beside me here. We've got Strategic Programmes and Assets Manager, Kieran Mansfield. And we've got Democratic Services, we've got Philippa Richardson tonight. Also, the main person here tonight that we're all interested in listening to and asking questions of is Neil Miller from Homes England. So welcome tonight. There is no fire drill planned tonight, so if the alarm sounds, it's real and live, and you need to leave via the exits and assemble outside where directed. Do not use the lift. I don't think anyone needs any assistance that's in the room tonight. Right. Are there any apologies for absence, Philippa, and any confirmation of substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Anne Kavanagh, who is substituted by Councillor Angela Harrison, from Councillor Alex Eyre, who is substituted by Councillor Charles Gibson, from Councillor Kerry Pollard, and from Councillor Richard Palmer, and also Councillor Leanne Moore is attending online. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is there any declarations of interest anyone wants to declare tonight? No. Because there's only a few of us, I think as we've got a visitor here, it'd be really good when you first speak tonight if you could introduce and say your name and possibly your ward, so it gives them an idea of where you're representing tonight. Thank you. Right. So we have tonight the principal item on the agenda. Actually, before I go into that, I'm just going to do a bit of an intro. We're having discussion at our agenda meeting yesterday about items coming up in the next meeting. And one of the items that I think members will be interested in, certainly I was, and I sounded out the members that were in attendance yesterday, is around the issues of Section 106 and the issues of delivering services or infrastructure and the problems that we have in getting those delivered in a timely fashion. And I speak as from my ward perspective that I'm conscious that there is a lot of money sat in the bank accounts where Swell is the principal holder of those funds on behalf of other parties, including KCC. And sometimes that money is sat there for years and there doesn't appear to be a plan for those assets to be brought forward. And I think as this committee, its principle is around property and regeneration. It is really important that the infrastructure is delivered around those projects. So I've asked to put this on the forward agenda as an agenda item coming up. So what we're going to particularly focus on, and I'd like to get, is a good overarching view of Section 106s across the borough. Now, we know that there is a monitoring report that goes to the planning committee, but I think for us to have an awareness of where those are, the principal infrastructure projects that need to be completed, where and when, and the timing of those, and how we can move things forward. So I'm thinking things like bus funding, where there's collective pots, and I know in my ward there's £240,000 that's been unspent for the last 7 years. And I would like to see an action plan of how that is to be spent and how we can help coordinate and push that forward as a committee and possibly bring those items forward. So that's the aim of that agenda item. I hope that you're all in agreement with that. And if you've got any particular views or issues that would like flagged, then please let Joanne and I know, so we can make sure that we cover those off. And so this is really to scrutinise what we have, what's available, and how we can help try and coordinate that going forwards. Okay, all right. So that's a bit of an intro. Right, Neil, we've got here agenda item 4, which is Queenborough and Rushenden Housing Infrastructure Fund. And as members will be aware, that Queenborough and Rushenden is one of the largest site allocations of housing in the borough. And Kieran here has written a report that I take it everybody has read, and several times, I hope. And there is a very handy timeline on the back. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Kieran to give us a bit of an introduction. We're noting this tonight, however, you may wish to change that recommendation to just noting to some other actions. So, members, I'm going to hand over to Kieran, and then we will ask our visitor to maybe give us more of an introduction. And then once you've given your introduction, we'll ask you some questions, if we may. Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll keep this brief, members, because this is very much the pre-committee brief, same as the pre-committee briefing that I did a few weeks back. But essentially what the report sets out is the context for the discussion tonight. It emphasises the length of time over which this proposed development regeneration scheme has been in the making. So it dates back to 2003, and the various steps that have happened since 2003 are set out, as the Chair has said, in the timeline at the back of the report. So there have been a number of shifts over time in relation to the ambitions for the site, particularly around the housing delivery, and they have reflected kind of changing economic circumstances over that protracted period. There is, within the regeneration scheme, starting at 2,000, subsequently reducing to 1,180, with a mix of community facilities built into it. The council's direct involvement with the scheme. So we've been an encouraging partner since the start, if you like. Our direct involvement really came initially through Thames Gateway money and our involvement in bidding for Thames Gateway money, and then its subsequent deployment to for instance, provide the Rushenden Link Road, and then more latterly through the Housing Infrastructure Fund marginal viability funding, which was launched in 2017 by the then Conservative government, and it was grant money directly to support the delivery of housing sites where it was required. So we bid for a pot of money, which started off at £3.5 million, but again over time, because of changing costs and other circumstances, the final grant awarded was £6.1 million. And having secured that money, we then delivered a set of remediation works, some on-site infrastructure, which included, for instance, drainage, pumping, etc., and also some land raising. We completed those works on time and to budget, and there is a subsequent monitoring regime that goes with it. that monitoring regime includes some scrutiny of the outputs, if you like, not the outputs, sorry, the outcomes of that funding relating to the housing development. So we've been in discussion because of the shifting sands, which I'm sure that Neil will talk about more fully. We've been in discussion with Homes England about I should explain, Homes England are also the monitoring body for the grants, as well as the owner of the site, and it puts us in a slightly unique position nationally. We have been in negotiation and discussion with Homes England about how we square the circle of the changing nature of the housing outputs that would come from the development, which were set out as per the 2015 position at 1,180 minus the 110 that were built. And we have come to a conclusion with them now, and we have written to Homes England requesting that essentially the funding agreement is brought to an end at no cost to either party. So we couldn't be held in default for the housing not coming forward in the numbers that it was supposed to through no fault of our own. And that's something we expect to be approved. We're just waiting on the smoke from Homes England. I think that's as much as I was going to say for now, Chair, and hand over to yourself and Neil.
So just to clarify, that Homes England own the site, but equally they gave out a grant for which we delivered the works and they monitored that grant funding.
Yeah, to be fair, it wasn't Homes England that gave out the grant. It was then MHCLG that gave out the grants. But then MHCLG gave Homes England the task of monitoring it subsequently.
It's called self-policing. Yeah, okay. Marking your own homework, okay. But because of that, because the housing hasn't been delivered, technically there's a default on us, is the situation. Because technically, Homes England haven't delivered the housing on site.
Yes, we're not yet in default.
No.
Well, it's marginal whether we are or not, but we are not yet in default, but we would be in default based on the housing delivery if that changes. And therefore, the request that we've made to Homes England, having discussed it at length with them, is that basically the agreement is terminated to reflect that position. Again,
yeah,
as I said, over which we have no control. And that's something that the officials at Homes England appreciate and are hopefully taking forward.
Okay, right. On that cheery note, Neil, over to you. Where do you want to give us an update of where you think you are on the site?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. I don't think I'll necessarily go into detail on the history. I'll leave that for questions maybe, because I think that might be a bit easier. What I'll talk about now is where we are now and what our plan is for getting to the point where we can start seeing some delivery from this site. I mean, I personally have been involved in this project for longer than I care to remember. So back in 2008, I started to get involved in this. So I think, fully accept, and I don't think we can defend, although there are reasons and justifications for the length of time this has taken. And clearly what we're trying to do now is focus on getting to delivery for everybody's sake. So some of you I know will have the benefit of some discussions that we had, probably about 6 months ago now. But just as a brief summary as to where we are, what we've been doing, we've been running through some planning work, some pre-app work with your planning department. Trying to bottom out a few issues of clarification around the status of planning policy and how it will affect the site coming forward. That has taken us considerably longer than I'd hoped. One of the key issues has been around affordable housing and the provision of the school, or the potential provision of the school. In what we've also been doing in the background is sort of trying to collate all of our historic information, all of our site information, all of our surveys, all of which will form what we would class as a information pack for a data room. So when we get to the point where we're talking to potential partners, there's a library of information that they're able to access, in terms of technical surveys and reports and planning information, things like that. So we've been doing that as well as twin tracking this planning work. What we've also been doing is working on some engagement with the market in terms of what is the offer that we're potentially going to be talking about, what sort of structure we might be able to offer, what the potential agreement that we might be looking to get into with a developer partner. So that all that work's been going on, and the timeline now is, and I think we talked about this last year, is we're hoping by the summer that we will be in a position to clarify what the strategy is. And at the moment, we're looking at sort of two options. One is we either try and secure a partner now to work with us. So this wouldn't be a case of sort of stepping away. And I think I've made this point several times previously. It's not a case of us stepping away. It's a case of what we would do on any other site, which is, obviously we don't build directly. So our partners will always deliver the project. So whether we can have the ability to try and secure a partner to work up detailed planning applications in conjunction with, obviously, with consultation with SWAL and with the local community, working as a partnership between us and the development partner, or whether we have to potentially go through a more of a public procurement exercise and put it out to the market and through our development partner framework that we have, our DPS. So the main focus, though, on the strategy that we're going to adopt is we want to try and focus on what is the quickest route to delivery. So going back to the point that, fair criticism, I think, about the site sat there for a long time, undeveloped. And I say we can go through some of the detail and some of the challenges that we've had over the years, because I myself, unfortunately, I've been involved in all of them. So we can talk about that in a bit more detail if that's what you'd like to do. But really, it's to focus on how can we get to delivery, the quickest route to us getting there, and that's really what we're focusing on at the moment. And I would say, within the next 4 or 5 months, we'll have a clear idea about what that route is, and you'll actually, hopefully be able to see some activity with us starting that process and starting to try identify a partner to actually get to delivery.
Okay, thank you. Right, members. I forgot to say, apologies. Sarah, Councillor Stevens, couldn't make it in. She's full of cold and she didn't want to give you all her germs, so she's attending remotely. Councillor Harrison, do you want to fire away first?
Yeah, I don't want the germs either, so thank you, Sarah. Neil, we did meet all those years ago. This was Levelling Up before Levelling Up was invented. The ethos, all that planning for real and all the rest of it was because it's even worse now. Developers, if you give us money, we might build on the Isle of Sheppey because we're not going to make any profit. You know that. Woe is me, which is why there, for many years there was no 106 affordable housing, and we felt at the time. I've continued to feel that the only way that this, I don't think we're at the master plan anymore, which I've probably still got indoors, by the way. I don't think we're there yet, but what was really crucial was the affordable housing on that on that huge site. I'm not saying that there weren't going to be houses for sale, but that was the key thing, because that was also a deprived area. And my reference to levelling up, well, that was before they'd even thought of the term, wasn't it? And the work that you and your colleagues put in there, you actually, you know, I can't think of anywhere else I've seen it where you actually took the whole community with you in wanting that levelling up, we'll call it. So I suppose my concern is that, and okay, we've had different governments all the way through. My concern is that you will be told, look, just get shot. Find some developer out there who, you know, needs to make some money. We'll get diddly squat out of it in terms of community benefits. I know that for a fact, because we've had diddly squat out of umpteen thousand houses in the past 10, 15, 20 years on the Isle of Sheppey. It was only the fact that it was government-led, the government was doing it in the form of CEDA, that you put all of these benefits in that make a community. So my concern is that you'll be told, oh, just get shot. No, you're not even going to have your finger in the pie. And I know that there was you and a colleague, Dr. somebody or other, who was clinging on with your fingertips when CEDA got shot off. And I just think all of the money, all of the hard work and the goodwill of the community will be going down the pan if that is what ultimately happens. What you've just said here is that you're still looking to be involved and to have a partner, but I suppose my view would be, how much of a partnership, what would your involvement be? Yes, you know, you ain't got builders up there, have you? I know. So you'll need to take on a partner who can actually do the work, do the buildings. But I suppose how much would you be involved? Not hopefully you personally, because this was your project, but you and the agency going forward, were you to get this partner, and I really hope you do. So it's really about, I know what you put into it. There's very few people on this council still who do know what went into it. One of the people online, just for your information, was actually lives in Rushden, was involved in the Planning for Real exercise, which was such an example of what could be done. And when that master plan came to this council, we said, it didn't last long except for here, this should be the blueprint for the way forward on every development. As I say, it didn't last long, the threat of going to court and members buckle. But it was such a vision. I can't speak highly enough of how we want you to still be involved in that, in seeing it through to the end. Okay, a lot smaller than we first thought, but still having that vision there. Sorry I've gone on, Neil, but I'm really passionate about this. Thanks.
Yeah, well, no, thanks. I appreciate the sentiment behind some of that, and yeah, I mean, we could probably spend 2 or 3 hours going through the history, and you know, I was involved in that early work. You know, it was a different organisation, obviously a different government, a different regime that we worked within, and what we've had over the last 13, 14 years is obviously successive governments, changing priorities, changing environment for us to work within, both sort of the legislative framework and the financial frameworks that control what we're able to do. But what we've tried to do is we've tried to steer a course through that and try and achieve the original objectives of all of this, which is absolutely not to try not to lose all of that hard work and goodwill that was built. And I appreciate over time that tends to diminish because it's like, well, you did all that work, so where's the result? So sort of taking all of that into account, and the objectives that were set in that master plan, and so that this kind of work it goes on, and it's fair to say that previous administrations that we've had to work with, it's been less of a priority perhaps than it is now, where it's swung back, and we obviously a lot of that work on sites that we're dealing with now is the norm. So we are we do use all of that as best practice. But where we are now in terms of making sure that we don't step away from that, the strategy for delivery on this site is no different than any other site that we deal with. Typically, on some of our big strategic sites where we're talking about 3, 4, 5,000 homes, we do adopt more of this sort of the master developer role, where we'll require sites and we'll get planning, so very similar to what we've done at Queenborough, and then we deal with individual parcels. So there might be a 200 unit parcel or 300 unit parcel, and we'll work the way through the site. What we are doing more so now is typically, if a scheme is, say, between 750 and 2,000 homes, we're not necessarily doing that role. We are leaving that up to our developer partners, because they are interested in having a stake in a larger pipeline of work, obviously. And the bigger the stake, the more likely you are to get a buy-in to placemaking. Because obviously, if you're a developer and you're coming and saying, well, I'm just going to build 200 homes here, and then someone else is going to build the next 200, and someone else is going to build the next 200, there's less incentive. I'm not saying they do bad schemes, but there's less incentive to think about that longer term placemaking. Whereas if you've got a stake in a bigger scheme, the incentive is on you to do the best scheme you can, because obviously you want the whole thing to be successful. So we are adopting that strategy on a number of sites. We've got a couple going through now. We did 2 last year, one of 800. We've got one going through this year that's 1,500 homes. We've got one 1,400, not too far away. So it's more of what we're doing now. So what we're proposing here is no different than what we're doing anywhere else, which is trying to get our developer partners on board and try and get them engaged in that longer term buy-in. So as I said, helping to create place. And typically the way it's structured, I know I've spoken to some of you about this before, but these would sort of typically be done on a sort of building lease type arrangements, or we'll have an overarching contract. So what we don't do is we don't sell a site to a developer and then we step away. The contracts that we have will have a series of obligations. So when we say to our partners, here is the opportunity and here are all the things that we require you to do, they go into the contract, and so they're obliged to do that. So they're not only controlled through planning, but obviously, they'd have to put forward a planning application that would have to be approved and consulted on. But backing that up will be a sort of contractual arrangement that we will have, where we will be able to say to our partners, and we do treat them as partners. They're not just, sort of developers that come in and do work. They are our partners. And obviously across nationally, we have a lot of relationships. So we have multiple sites with different developers. So we do have a quite an extensive relationship with some of our partners. But the obligation is on them to perform what we've asked them to do. And obviously we can point to the contract and say, we told you this at the beginning, this is what we wanted you to do, and this is what we need you to do. What we do is we work very closely with partners. So when they're developing their planning applications, they will do that in consultation with us. So we have our own internal design teams, we have our own internal planning teams, and partners will come to us and will work up their proposals in conjunction with us, so they don't just disappear and develop a scheme and come back and say this is what we're doing. We're involved in that all the way through. Ultimately, our contracts require us to sign off on any planning applications. So again, what we don't have is our developer partners just rocking up and submitting a planning application without us knowing. We're fully involved in that process, and we get to a point where we have to sign off on that. Public consultation events, we will be part of that. So again, it's not just our developers turning up, you know, it is a joint application. So the application will be coming between Homes England and ex-developer. So there's a number of sort of checks and balances that we have in terms of how we structure our involvement in sites going forward. You know, we do have example. I mean, obviously we've got thousands of sites across the country. So there are occasions when we will sell a site freehold and we won't necessarily be involved, but they tend to be smaller sites that, you know, don't necessarily require the resource of us being involved longer term. But on the sort of these bigger strategic sites, is 100%, you know, it's in our interest to stay involved. And that's how we sort of have control over what product is coming forward, what scheme is coming forward, because of that contractual relationship we have and the oversight over the development of any planning application. So, you know, our involvement, as I say, is not, you know, it will continue. We are not stepping away, and we will be fully involved in whatever proposal is coming forward.
Can I just clarify, because you've said there on a couple of occasions on larger sites, what housing numbers are you looking at now?
So I think somewhere between 500 and 600.
Right. I'm not going to make a comment on that at the moment. I'm going to go to the next councillor, Councillor Whiting, then Councillor Gibson and Councillor Wise.
Thanks, Jan. I'm obliged as a visiting member to be able to answer some questions, ask some questions and things. I'm Mike Whiting. I'm one of the council members for Queenborough and Halfway, so this is right on my patch. Thanks, Neil, for your words, and I'd like to say I'm encouraged by them, but unfortunately, I don't feel I can say that. You talk about being focused on delivery, which is a big red flag, because it strikes me there's a sort of at any cost implication in that, and which isn't what the community in Queenborough signed up for. It's not what the community across Swale and certainly on the island signed up for. So I'd like your comments perhaps in a minute on you know, is it at any cost? I'm worried about that. It's good that you're going to be talking to partners and that you hope to get some partnership going. But I'm interested to know what discussions that you've that haven't happened with developers thus far that are going to start to happen. What are you going to be saying to developers that you haven't been saying for the last 15 years? I mean, I've been on this since 2009 as well, I think. So it's all been going a very long time. So what new discussions are you going to have that you've not yet had? Because the ones you've had to date haven't resulted in a partnership coming forward. So I'd be interested to know what's going to change on that front. I am concerned about this sort of one-size-fits-all model that you say that you're applying now to developments under, I think you said under 1,500 to 2,000. Well, this clearly falls in there. And I don't think that this site deserves a one-size-fits-all approach. I think it requires a more bespoke approach. So I'm disappointed if I've read that wrong. Please correct me, but that's the way I heard it. And finally, and Councillor Harrison mentioned it, this sort of trade-off, if you like, between social housing, between the community benefits, the school, the GP surgery, the open spaces, the creekside industrial developments, and all the other things that were going to help embed this development into a very ancient and existing community. in such a way that it could land for the benefit of that community. The smaller the number of units that you deliver, the less money there is in the pot for all of those things that we know were a stretch at 1,800 or whatever it was originally, and become a bigger stretch at 1,100. And if you're talking between 500 and 600, things are going to go. So what is your priority when you're drawing up this contract with this developer, which I hope you find, and when you're drawing up this contract of deliverables that they will be contracted to deliver, do you have any in your mind at the moment a priority order for those things? Does a school come before a GP surgery? Does a GP surgery come before an open space? Because I think it's going to be quite important to the local community to understand as early as possible what it is Homes England is willing to kind of give up to use yours, or get this over the line. So there's a number of questions, and the final one, Chair, if I may, is just this question about the agreement, the GDA. Just wonder what your views on it. Clearly, the officers here are working hard to get that terminated. What's your position on? What's your position as of now about whether that will be terminated or not? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
Neil,
So
feel free to answer those.
a few things there. So first off, at any cost, no, absolutely not. It sort of links in as well a bit to the priorities question. It's not for us to set priorities. It's for that's the consultation with Swale and the community to identify what those priorities are, because clearly, well, I was going to say even at Central London we struggle, but for a scheme to be able to meet 100% of its objectives is rare. So it is sometimes about prioritising. What we won't have is we won't have a contract with a developer that says you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then come out and design a scheme and talk to everyone. It works the other way around. So all of that work will then feed into the agreement that says, okay, after we've all been through this process, we've developed a scheme, we've consulted with everybody, we've gone back and forward, we've tried to identify what the things are that are the most important. That will then feed into the contract that when we actually get to the point of submitting a planning application, those things will then be clarified and embedded. Obviously, the starting point at the moment is still the master plan, which is a document that is adopted SPD. Clearly, what we've been doing recently is trying to identify where those changes are from that, because that is 8 years old, 9 years old now. And one of the things that has been affected, and this is pretty much across the board for a lot of schemes that we're seeing now, is that densities are actually going the opposite way, and that is to make the schemes more viable. So actually, it's not necessarily a case of fewer homes, less potential surplus funding that's available for Section 106. It's actually the other way round, because the sort of the returns that you'll get out from family housing are better than you will from apartments. So it's not just the numbers game. It's got to respond to market. It's got to respond to demand. There's absolutely no point in building stuff that people aren't going to buy. And that's been one of the sort of real key things that have come out of the recent work, is around what we think the market interest is, but also just the ability to deliver the shift from apartments to family housing, because that's where the demand is, and that's obviously had a significant effect on densities, because clearly if you more homes that you produce from flats than you will from family housing. So it's certainly not at any cost. I mean, the driver is delivery, but the driver is delivery of a trying to meet the aspirations of the master plan. So it is both. It isn't just. I mean, if I don't know if you recall, probably 10 years ago, we were in a very difficult position where it was, well, probably more than 10 years ago now, but it was there was a lot of pressure on overall delivery and numbers, and there was a lot of focus on that, and with sort of a step away necessarily from any primary focus on necessarily on sort of quality and placemaking. Well, that's one of the things that's come back, and so that is one of the focuses of the agency. It's one of our key objectives, and of course, we, over and above what the private sector are able to do, we are able to structure our agreements in such a way that gives a bit more flexibility to developers to be able to respond to some of those objectives. Now, so those objectives we have, but ultimately they have to come from the local authority. They have to come from the community to help us set what those priorities will be in terms of whatever agreement we get into with a developer. So it's definitely not at any cost. I mean, and it's an answer to the question of a one size fits all. This isn't a one size fits all. This will actually be a very bespoke agreement that we're going to have to pull together for this site because of the challenges that it has. So the sort of business as usual model is that we will get into an agreement with a development partner to bring the site forward. So that's the basic principle. So that is the business as usual model. But in terms of what the agreement will look like and how it will work, this will actually be a really bespoke structure, because our standard disposal contracts that we would use on a site that's particularly it's got good viability and there aren't really many challenges to it, that's a sort of standard set of agreements. This will be a very bespoke agreement. So it will 100% have to reflect the specific challenges of this particular site. In terms of the conversations that we've been having, we have obviously we speak to our partners all the time, so we're constantly engaging. We haven't been in a position to be able to push the button to have a meaningful discussion with developer or partner, or to be able to push the button on a procurement exercise until very recently. And that has been, so over the years, and so we sort of just touched it a little bit on the history, we've had various challenges. So, winding the clock right back, it was about site acquisitions in order to assemble the site. So obviously that took a considerable amount of time to get to that point. We then had another period where we were working with KCC to fund and implement the link road, which was necessary before any housing could come forward. Obviously, we also were focusing on bringing forward Neats Court, because that was about trying to secure employment before the housing. So trying to get some infrastructure in and sort of balance out the job opportunities before just bringing forward the housing. We then had probably in about 2014, 2015, we had the issue about the increase in flood risk, which came about through the Environment Agency publishing climate change information, and that then led to the need to undertake all the land raising, obviously, which you will, if you know the site, you'll see all that work that's been done. When we purchased the site, and in the original master plan, that wasn't a requirement. If we had to pay for that land raising, it would have been over £10 million. What we managed to do was secure a commercial agreement to bring in excavations from other developments, but unfortunately that meant it took a lot longer because we had to wait for developments to generate the material rather than buying material in. And that was because simply at that point the funding wasn't available to facilitate that. So that ended up taking us a considerable amount of time to achieve the land raising, which brings the whole site out of the potential flood risk. So that was years of work, which was never envisaged when we purchased the site. It was never envisaged when we undertook the master planning. So that's part of the issue. We then obviously had the work on the former Klondike site to undertake. Our ability at that point to secure additional money to facilitate that, was extremely difficult and challenging for us to be able to deliver that. And that's why we ended up going down the HIF route, because that was a potential source of funding that was available to local authorities that wasn't necessarily available to us directly. So again, that period of time to secure that and undertake the works. And then more recently, so we'd hoped at the end of the HIF works, we thought, okay, well, we're in a position now. Okay, we've done pretty much, everything we need to do in terms of the planning position's clear, the infrastructure, the road infrastructure's in. We've done all the site enabling works that we can do. The site's ready, and then we got hit obviously with COVID delays, the rampant cost inflation that came from sort of end of 2021 through to 2023, which really hit viability, not on this, only on this scheme, pretty much every single scheme that we've got. The expectations about what something will cost and what something will sell for completely flipped. So pretty much over the last 30, 40 years, values have always outstripped cost inflation, and from sort of 2021 that completely flipped and everything became considerably more expensive simply to build, but values weren't keeping track with that, and normally developers will balance those two things out. They will expect some growth in value that will cover the cost of cost inflation increases. That completely wiped out. So that was another challenge that we had to take into account. And then in addition to all of that, just when we sort of thought hopefully we think we might be ready to push the button on this, we have also had the requirements of BNG to consider. That is either a requirement to provide BNG on site, which means you have less available space to build, and that affects densities, which again is one of the reasons why densities have come down, because there is a need to provide the diversity net gain solution on site. If you provide it off site, it comes at a considerable cost, on top of all the additional costs that have come through the cost inflation period that we've seen since 2021. Literally everything is conspiring against the ability to actually push the button and say, okay, we've drawn a line under this now, and we are now ready to engage with a partner to say, here is the proposition, please can we now work on a scheme and how we can deliver.
Councillor Whiting.
I was going to say we weren't going to talk about the history, because I know that I think we've read
all know it.
We know the history,
Yeah.
and we appreciate there's been all sorts of problems.
But it was in specific answer to the question: what
discussions are you going to have now that you've not had? What you're saying is you've not had any discussions at all yet, Willie, because all this other stuff's been going on.
No, we have. Yeah, so we've carried on having.
So what will the new discussions be?
But I think it was in answer to why have you not been able to engage with a partner up until this point? So I was putting that into context. Okay. All right.
Okay. Just so that those listening online, I do have Councillor Worcester and Councillor Shield on my list, so don't worry, I've not forgotten you. Okay.
So sorry. So in answer to that part of the question, sorry, I misunderstood your question then. The difference is, unless unless some other legislation comes in, we know all the previous unknowns. So we're now in a position where we can take into account everything that we think we need to, and that now puts us in that position where we can push the button and start having those meaningful discussions. Up until this point, every time we've sort of got close to that point, something else has come along. And that was sort of why I was just referencing some of the history.
Okay. Councillor Whiting, is that your questions answered? Is there any on the list that's not?
Terminating the agreement.
Yes. What's your view?
Sorry, the
Termination of the agreement.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest. I don't know if I can talk about that without having some detailed discussions. I would just say I think it might be a perverse situation for an organisation to pursue something that they may well be part of the problem.
Yes,
So
I would say that.
I
I think it's called shooting yourself in the foot.
I will take that back and we'll have some further discussions.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I think perverse is the word. Local government baffles many of us at many times, but Homes England deciding whether or not they're going to release us from a possible fine for a thing they didn't deliver is really right up there in the list of things that are pretty baffling. My questions really were around the density and the timing. So we've discussed the reduction in density, but particularly the consultation on 2.17 that the market doesn't want flats. That reads like quite a half-assed consultation in that you've asked developers what they want to build and sell, not residents or members what they think residents need, which I'm not an expert in the island of Sheppey. I'm a Faversham councillor, but I would strongly suggest that might be different to what the developers want to build. And then I suppose my second question is, aside from that, and we've heard a great deal of detail about the barriers to getting to this point, what are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns? Given you're now suggesting you have only known knowns, what is the time scale to spades in the ground, given we're talking about a 23-year cycle? I'm just thinking, in my day job, I spend a lot of time talking to the Ripon Military Heritage Trust, who are at the beginning of what may or may not be a 25-year programme of military heritage and Homes England project for them. But I'm just, trying to get a scale of what that looks like for us here to at the end of that and see what that would be.
So, I mean, in answer to, so it's not a case of, I don't think that there will be a mix of unit types. It's just the proportion. And I think previously there was more of a weighting than I think, and this is so. Our developer partners are experienced in what the market is interested in. We also have a lot of experience in terms of other sites locally, and all of that will help inform. There is still the point that I was making that as the scheme develops, it will go through consultation. So if there is feedback and if there is, evidence that actually whatever, so, it will be an iterative process. So something will be presented, it will be discussed, and then changes will be made to it. So if there is feedback that pushes the scheme in one way or another, then that is part of the process. So there's nothing that's necessarily fixed. But what we're saying is, at the moment, in our experience, and certainly in our partners' experience, it's one thing to say that we think there's a demand, but unfortunately, it's the risk is that you build it and then people don't buy them. But if, as I say, as part of the consultation period process, if that information, that feedback comes up, then obviously that will get fed into the scheme. So there's no, I don't have a scheme drawn up in the bag, to say this is what's going to happen. That just doesn't exist at the moment. So that will be an iterative process, and we will, so absolutely that sort of thing could be taken into account. In terms of a spade in the ground, This has been recorded. It's very no. Sorry, I'll be facetious. It's extreme. I would say if we were being extremely optimistic and said that by the summer we could be engaging with a partner, obviously there's a procurement process to go through, and then a planning process to go through. Swale have been particularly helpful. I'm not going to sit here and criticise Swale as an LPA, but we are struggling in other areas to get planning applications into committees. I've got one at the moment that should have been in October, and it's going now in March, and that's because of a couple of pretty minor issues, to be fair. So look, I'm just saying, things are taking a lot longer than we ever expect in terms of planning. I would hope within 12 months of having a partner on board that we could have have a scheme in and be at a committee. And then typically after planning, we would expect someone to be on site within 3 to 4 months. So 18 months from a developer partner, I would hope, would be a reasonable timescale.
Okay, does that answer your questions? Okay, thank you. Councillor Wise.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, the discussion's moved on quite a bit from when I indicated to speak, so some of my points have been answered, but it's sort of thrown open a whole load of other questions, so I'm sort of still gathering my thoughts somewhat, so forgive me, but I think the point that you made about this scheme having, infrastructure come in first, employment come in first, all of that's great. There's stuff that's happened, particularly Neats Court, which we all welcome. And following on from what my colleague next to me said, I think really a lot of us come from the view that we want this to go through as a scheme to its maximum possible potential. That's where we want to see this go, because for me, a lot of the issues that arise from public concern about housing developments is trust that what they have been promised is what they get, and having a government agency somewhat underpinning this project is always something that we've wanted to make the most of in that regard. So I was reassured by what you said to Councillor Whiting about this being a sort of bespoke arrangement that we get down the line. But then I was also concerned by what you said about something being classed as a strategic project, and then the numbers you spoke about here being possibly delivered being something that you called a small scheme in other contexts. So that's concerning for me, because when it's a developer-led scheme without any of this sort of underpinning or master planning involved, we don't get the placemaking that we expect most of the time, sadly. And so putting that trust on them is concerning for me. So I know that in some of your responses, there's been some sort of reassurance about that, but I just wonder how you can say for some sort of certainty that sort of placemaking would be. How do you guarantee that through these sorts of projects? And I do understand.
Do you want to ask that and get an answer and then go on to your next one?
Well, there's just something else linked to that, if that's okay, Chair. I think the other bit that then is key to that is the point about what the market assessment is about what is the sort of housing need. Because placemaking is also shaped by the mix that you get on site. And I think there's been substantial development on the island, which have been large family homes. And there is a real need, but the market might not see it there because of what they can see as trying to extract from the ultimate value that they can get at the end of the project, but there is a real need for smaller homes actually on the island. I don't think a lot of the developments there have been over the last decade or more have delivered those for the island, and I think that's a sort of key point to that placemaking and that community trust, because people on the island want to know that they will be able to get those homes. So we've done the thing about the jobs, great. We've done the thing about some of the substantial infrastructure, great. People locally are benefiting from those. But how do we reassure them then that that placemaking will be delivered, as you sort of spelled out, and that central to that is the sort of mixed development that we would hope is possible and feasible from that, and that hopefully is a greater number than what you have sort of said as the ballpark figure. I think that's it for now. I may just have another couple of points, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Neil, over to you.
Yeah. So I think, you know, fundamentally, how do we ensure the sort of quality? So, you know, as I say, we'll go back to, you know, sort of the main objectives of the master plan, you know, still exist. That is still an SPD document. Now, obviously, a lot of it has changed, but, you know, it is still relevant and still needs to be answered by any application that comes forward. We have our own, you know, and this is obviously the advantage of us being involved as opposed to, you know, a private landowner. We have our own internal quality requirements. And so I think I've spoken about this before, that Building for a Healthy Life is a sort of minimum that we would expect, which has a series of design and quality standards that are expected to be met by any scheme. And that's over and above clearly what Swale are able to deliver as the LPA. So clearly, you know, there was a period of time when it was felt that we shouldn't be imposing certain standards, because if you go back to the master plan, you know, we talked about code for sustainable homes and things like that. And it should be left to the local authority to determine what is and isn't a requirement for, you know, the communities that they serve. And now we're sort of in a position where we do a bit of both, where we definitely have some placemaking and quality standards that we will expect developers to deliver. And that is in conjunction with whatever direction we get from the LPA. So coming back to the sort of consultation point. So, and clearly what we have is an ability to use our unique position to be able to ensure that we can structure agreements to try and achieve those best outcomes. We have an obligation under our own legislation frameworks to make sure that, you know, we're not simply giving land away, and that we are, you know, we have our best consideration obligations the same as local authorities. But what we do have is the flexibility to try and meet some of our other objectives, to take that into account when we're trying to structure something with our development partners. So there's a sort of number of ways there that we can ensure, as I say, you know, we are sitting behind or sitting alongside the developers to make sure that, you know, we are trying to get the best scheme that we can. I mean, in terms of numbers, even at the reduced numbers, you know, the densities aren't going to generate the sort of those larger family homes that I think perhaps you're referring to. You simply couldn't. There's not the land available to do that. So I think, again, that will come out in terms of the consultation, but even the problem is, as I say, we've got additional requirements now on the site. So, you know, if you had 5 acres to build on, you've now got 4 acres to build on, because you need to utilise some of the land on site to provide things like BNG, which wasn't, 2 years ago, wasn't a consideration. So it's not just a case of, and I say, going back to how we can structure these things. So, clearly, and I've talked about this before as well. Developers they're a business; they need to make a return. That's why they're in that business. But obviously, partnering with us, there are different requirements and different different drivers for them to work with us, as opposed to just a sort of more straightforward private development.
Sorry, could you clarify what you actually mean? Why would they? I'm confused, because if you've got a unique position in your structure that you're building for a healthy life, this whatever it is standard that's over and above the local authority's requirement under its local plans, that effectively is more cost. So what you're getting is lower density. So every time you layer this in, you're reducing your numbers on site. So you might be saying, well, making place, but actually there's nothing left to make a place for, because you're going to have such few numbers on site. Yeah. And that won't fund the infrastructure. This is a circle you cannot square without Homes England putting more money in. I mean, what I'd like to know is what you've actually put in. How much public money has been spent on this site?
So I'll have to come back to you on the...
I think it's in the region of 30 to 40 million plus, isn't it?
It's in the region of 30, because we've got we've spoken about this before, but any additional funding would then take us into further Treasury approvals. But I can come back to you with a formal number. Layering on quality requirements doesn't directly correlate to a reduction in unit numbers. I mean, that's not something that...
No, but it adds to the cost. So it means you've got to get value in order to pay for that. You need to somehow pay for that.
And that's reflected in, obviously, whatever offer developers are able to...
You've done no viability assessment so far?
Yes, yeah, we've done viabilities, yeah.
So you must know, if you've got a viability assessment, what that says. I mean, you must have plugged in numbers for how many flats, how many houses.
Yeah.
And what is that split?
Well, we've got several different models. So it's not just running one model, but we've taken what might be a typical scheme, and then we have various. I've worked in property finance for quite a few years, and there is no typical scheme. Everything is unique. Nothing is. You're bounded by planning, by local geography. Specific costs to site. So can you try and give us, because so far we've had a lot of vagaries. We're here as a committee, we've reconvened on a special meeting tonight, because you couldn't attend the last one. We want some specifics here. We're 23 years in, and we've had 100 homes delivered on this site, where there was originally a promise of 2,000. And the consequence for the members round here is that we've lost our 5-year supply, and a major factor of that, because this is the largest housing site in Swale, has not come forward in a timely fashion. This is wrecking our local planning, quite frankly. We have to deliver approximately 17,000 houses, of which we've got about 7,000 planning permissions outstanding. As you can see, the difference... This makes up quite a considerable site. If you're saying you've gone from 2,000 to just over 1,000, now down to 500, that's why this committee is interested. We want to know how many affordable homes we're going to get, because 20% of 2,000 versus 20% of 500 is a completely different scenario. And as I said to you when we were on the site visit, there's only one thing that can give here, and that's money. Money or the numbers. And what it seems to me is where we are at in Homes England, and I don't know if it's because we need to go above your level and we need to go up the tree and speak to Pennycook and the Treasury to get more funding to sort this site out, because this has wrecked our local plan allocations. So when I'm talking about a typical scheme, it's, you know, in terms of its location and other schemes that have come forward. So we would use that as a benchmark. You know, you've got to start somewhere. But, you know, I'm not going to sit here and necessarily provide you with that answer, because it's a movable feast. It's not fixed. There will be a starting point that will come, you know, when a scheme's developed, and we'll come forward and bring that forward for consultation. And, you know, and that's why we are keen to get into a position with a developer partner, because we could do that work and then we go out and secure a partner who wants to do something slightly different or has a different idea. So that's why we want to get in, because what we want to do is start trying to put some detail together so we can come forward and have those discussions and say, this is what we think it looks like, and try and get the views of everybody. So that's the point of that. In terms of, you know, additional funding, what would that additional funding be for? Does the additional funding translate into more density? Not necessarily. When I'm talking about our structures and what we're able to offer and the sort of bespoke agreement that we're going to have here, when we set our sort of overall sort of wider objectives at the beginning of trying to secure a development partner, clearly things like Building for Healthy Life, which is just it's a quality standard document. It's so necessarily over and above anything that Swale would necessarily be looking for as an LPA. It's not that significant a change. Any development partner that we talk to already knows that this is standard, so it's built into any assumptions that they make whenever they're talking to us about a site, because they know that that's one of the benchmarks that they need to try and achieve. But obviously what this boils down to is it affects what a developer will be talking to us about, the viability of the scheme and what they're able to effectively pay for the site. So clearly our ability to use our unique position to have those sort of discussions with developers means that we don't necessarily need to seek additional funding, because we can deal with it through the way we structure our agreements. So, and as I say, I don't think the answer necessarily more funding equals more density. I don't necessarily agree that would be the outcome.
How are you going to pay for the school? How are you going to pay for the infrastructure if there isn't the contributions there from each household?
So that's what we're modelling is, obviously there's an expectation that any scheme has to provide those things. So that is part of our, you know, the viability and assessment work that we've done. You know, we think that is achievable, and that's why we want to, I said, you know, try and move it forward and get a partner on board to actually, you know, test that. Now, if the outcome of that is that it doesn't work, then maybe there is another conversation to be had about how do we get past that. But we don't actually know that at the moment, and our sort of viability assessments and the work that we've done suggests that it is deliverable
on 550 homes.
Yeah.
I really frankly don't believe that. I've just sat through 56 days of public inquiry in Highstead Park where we were arguing about primary costs and how big a primary school should be and what is sustainable.
Yeah.
And I've got a development in my ward that's 550 homes, and that didn't support a primary school.
That will come down to how much they pay for the site. And that's the fundamental difference with this. So if you've got a developer who's, you know, sitting on, I've paid 5-10 million quid for a site and I can't afford to provide you with your Section 106 obligations, you know, we are working the other way. We're saying what needs to be achieved on this site, and ultimately that will derive whatever residual value is left. So that's where our unique position is, that we are not sitting here the same as a private landowner saying I must recoup every penny that I've spent on this site and more. So that's where we have a slightly different position.
Councillor Wise.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for letting me comment. I think that sort of addresses the other point I was going to ask, which is about this sense of a infrastructure deficit and how we reassure people then that hopefully if you get to the point that you've got a partner and that we can start to see something move on this site, that then there will obviously be some sort of concerns when those numbers are there about the expectations around the infrastructure delivery and then what comes through. So just be interested to know a little bit more then about how that sort of consultation effort works, what the sorts of things that would come through from that, what would the partner and public input in that be sort of, you'd be sort of seeking for that to shape. Because obviously we've got a master plan there, which you said, you know, that you'll still be borrowing heavily from. So just be interested to know, what does that sort of entail? What would those consultations really be hoping to achieve, I suppose? Because I think there will be a real concern about the infrastructure deficit that exists on the island, and whether, you know, much lower numbers do then result in ditching some of those infrastructure ambitions, and how do we reassure people then that that's not the case? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I'll go back to everything that I've said before about, you know, what the aspirations will be, what the objectives will be, and how we will feed into that process feedback from local authority, and that will involve sitting down and talking about the development of the scheme and saying this is what it looks like. Where do you think the gaps are? What do you think is missing? What do you think is needed? Now, the thing that is slightly different about this site is that what we would typically do is do a lot of that work as part of an outline planning application. The approach here was always the amount of work that had gone into the master plan was effectively similar to an outline planning application. What we've got now is a situation where obviously that's moved on, some things have changed. That's what we've been trying to do over the last year in terms of some of the pre-app discussions that we've been having with Swale to try and pin down where some of those changes are, some of the bigger changes, so we can have the confidence that we can go out and talk to our partners, trying to tick off all of the unknowns, as many as we can, to give that clarity to say, okay, this is the set of assumptions that we think you can move forward on. In terms of the consultation piece, though, you know, the outline. So the outline application that we would normally go through would identify the answers to a lot of those issues. We have spoken, and I've spoken to some of you before about this as well. If we was to go down that route, we would probably be adding at least another 18 months, 2 years to the process while we went through an outline application. So what we're trying to do, and this comes back to the sort of bespoke agreement. So we would normally have an outline, we'd have all those things sort of clarified. So when a developer bids, they have that certainty. We have a level of certainty. We also have a level of understanding about what we think is from our pre-app discussions about some of those issues where we think that Swale's position is. What we need to do to sort of cut through all of that is get a partner on board, get a scheme drawn up, and then come in and have those discussions. So that's the opportunity. So what we'll effectively be doing is the developer will be putting forward a detailed planning application, but doing a lot of the work in front of that would have been covered probably through an outline. So that's where the opportunity will come. And that's why And again, if we just put this to a developer, they wouldn't necessarily do that. They would jump straight to a detailed application. But because we are involved, we've got that period of time, and that's what we will build in when we're procuring a partner to say, this is what we will expect you to do. So that comes back to some of those sort of higher level objectives that we can set from the outset. And then we go through all that process. We hopefully identify where all the issues are. We get to a scheme that is hopefully broadly acceptable. And then that will then go into the detailed agreement where we'll say to the developers, this is what we'll expect you to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Worcester next. Come in, Councillor Worcester.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can, loud and clear.
Brilliant. So, brilliant for the committee to bring this to committee. I know it's been a long time in coming, so thank you very much for doing that. I'm really concerned with some of the things that I've been hearing this evening. For example, at the start of the Homes England discussion, there appeared to be a load of, like a list of reasons. I say reasons, but sound a fair amount of excuses actually why this hasn't come forward or been actioned actually. For example, using COVID or biodiversity net gain credits or all sorts of things. Well, in Kent, we've seen a number of these infrastructure developments go ahead and be really successful for other areas. For example, Margate. For example, Folkestone Harbour. For example, 20 minutes down the stream, Gillingham dock area, right outside the Medway police station. You know, and to say that, for instance, there is no need for high-rise or single flat development in that area is interesting, when the entirety or the majority of the Gillingham development, which has a number of key indicators exactly the same as Sheppey, has been extremely popular. And out of that development has come an extraordinarily successful secondary school and other infrastructure. It has revitalised that area brilliantly. And it's very concerning for me that we are expecting residents and expecting members to listen to what's been said by Homes England and say, well, that's okay then. Every developer had COVID to deal with. Every developer has had biodiversity net gain credits to wrangle with. I can't see anything different about this development other than it's been deprioritised. And the concerning thing for me is, oddly enough, this started when I went to university. And sadly enough, my daughter's almost at the same age to go to university. This has been almost the whole of her lifetime where this land has stood empty, and the residents in Rushington and Queenborough could have been absolutely having an excellent development. Is it still the case that we're still planning to offer no access to the waterfront through this development? Isn't that crazy? That we're offering a lovely vista and really exceptional view and landscaping down there, naturally made, and we're saying to residents, well, you can have no access to it. You know, it does seem a little bit contrary that we seem to be offering properties that have got a waterside location, and we're providing developments that have got no access to that and no potential business opportunity in that area, which doesn't sound like the best use of that area to me. So I was wondering if perhaps the officer could try again and think about what are the reasons that this hasn't come forward that are actually tangible reasons, and how they're not going to be created again. Because at the moment, when you say, oh, we're going to try and get a development partner, that sounds great, except that we're kind of begging them. And like I say, this sort of area of development has been desperately sought after in other deprived areas in Kent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dolly. Would you like to pick that up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I accept your point that, you know, it's easy to sit there and list off some reasons why, and yes, there are other schemes that have come forward. I would just go back to the point that the until fairly recently, until the land raising works had been completed, until the HIF work had been completed, we weren't actually in a position to have a site that was in a condition that you could go out and actually secure a partner. When we got to that point, we then had the COVID issues and more recently BNG. So that's why it is relevant. It is. I can appreciate what you're saying, that over the course of many different issues, they maybe sound like a list of excuses, but they are reasons why. And as I say, physically, the site wasn't actually in a position until sort of 2019, 2020, when all the works had been completed, to actually have something that we could have gone out to the market with. Just the point about the apartments and sort of smaller, I'll just make the point again. We're not saying that won't form part of the mix. So there are various assessments that we've run about what the mix could look like, but they range from one end of the spectrum to the other. We can't sit here now and say exactly what it's going to look like. That's the point about getting a developer partner on board, developing a scheme, and then putting that to everybody to say, okay, this is what we think. What's the feedback? So there is an opportunity there for consideration to be made about what people's views are and what they're saying. The point about waterfront access, I'm not really sure. There's always intended to be waterfront access. I don't know where that's come from. Certainly in terms of the master plan, there's an expectation that there will be public open space that links any development to the foreshore. So I'm not sure where that's come from. And also there is a clear requirement in the master plan, in the revised master plan, and will be still the intention that some kind of commercial leisure activity is developed around the creek side. So again, that's access to certainly to the water. But yeah, in terms of the frontage, I don't think there's ever been a suggestion that there wouldn't be public access.
So if I may, Dolly, I'm just going to come in and then I'll come back to you. So I'm looking at 3 maps here, and one of them is the original master plan, which sort of sets out in various colours what it was going to look like. Then there was the revised version, and the current version we have has a red hatched area, and it says, quote unquote, area safeguarded for future creekside leisure and commercial open space. So I can understand why Councillor Worcester's said that, because in effect the current policy carves out a chunk which is all the waterside element, and to my mind, the properties that would face onto that area are possibly the most valuable and could deliver the most impact in terms of delivery of infrastructure that they could support. We are obviously midway through. We're in the process of reviewing our local plan, and obviously the wording that is attributed to this site, you'll be no doubt discussing with the officers. Do you envisage changing any of that in terms of the red hatched area and bringing that forward at the same time, so that we don't have this cut off effectively? Because if I was a developer and I was looking at this, I'd say, do you know what, that to me is probably the most valuable bit there that I could get value out of.
So the red hatch areas was...
and the properties, if in effect these blocks here that would be adjacent to the water side.
So the reason it was specifically put in as part of the master plan is that it clearly needs to be developed. It needs to be brought forward and developed as part of the overall scheme. So there's no intention, and if a developer came forward with that proposal, then clearly at the first instance we would say no, that doesn't work, because that doesn't accord with the master plan. Even if we agree, even if we said to them, yeah, fine, okay, submit that, go and talk to Swale, clearly it doesn't accord with the master plan. So the idea of that space is, well, number one, there'll be a public footpath because it's already been agreed and designated that the I forgot what it's called, the coastal path.
Yeah,
Is it
we'll
the
go
King's
round,
Coastal
yeah,
Path?
yeah.
We'll go round anyway, so it needs to be publicly accessible. It also clearly needs to be integrated with the housing, and that's the point about having the obligation on the developers. So when they come to us, what they can't say is, well, we want to deal with the housing, but we don't want to deal with this bit. We'll leave that bit. There's an obligation on them that they have to deal with it all as one. So it has to be a cohesive, comprehensive solution. It can't just be carved out and said, we're not going to deal with this, or we just want to focus on the housing. It has to be brought forward together.
I'm confused as to when you say you're not going to be master developing it, but you're going to have these agreements that will have these controls in them as to how these things are brought forwards. Yeah. How does that work? Because if you're asking for, you know, when you go in for planning permission, there's going to be Section 106 agreements. The problem is, if this is not master planned, Section 106s and planning permission doesn't control the timing and delivery. You do. You're the owner of the site, correct, effectively. Yeah. What I don't feel we've got tonight is any understanding of which bits will be brought forward and in which timeframes, because, you know, this is the largest site allocation in the borough. It's not been delivered. It's been undelivered now for many years. If you're saying you've got one development partner and you've got these control mechanisms, because normally you would have a number of different developments going on at the same time, and you would be controlling those, how they're delivered. But the problem is, from one aspect of tonight, you've said it's a small development because it's only 500 to 600. But on the other hand, it's a large one. So I'm not sure, you know, it sounds to me like you're going with one partner, whether it's 500 or however many dwellings, how that control mechanism works. Because if it comes forward in parcels, if you've got possibly, it'd be lovely if you had a rental operator, you know, a private rental operator, because that's the rental market is, you know, a desperate situation in Swale, is we need more rental properties. And I should declare an interest here because I'm a director of Rainbow Homes, which is Swale's own housing company that has got a planning permission and is now obviously talking to your colleagues about funding for this. And it is all to rent. There's none of it is to be selling off, which is exactly the product that, and they're flats. So whatever you've said about, you know, these units, we know there's flatted developments on the island that have been brought forward in the last few years. And this is the sort of puff that we used to get from developers. I remember 7 years ago when I was sitting on the planning committee and they'd say, oh no, flat developments, we can't support a Section 106 for a flat development in Sittingbourne because we won't make enough profit in it. And we knew full well that would be the case, just because there wasn't a history of it. But it doesn't mean it doesn't work. And I think now we have you have an early market of flatted developments on the island. You can substantiate that. So I don't think it wears well with this committee, or certainly with me, that flatted developments and densities, because the units we ourselves as an authority are looking to deliver on our own site in less time than you guys have been working on your site is, you know, we're poles apart here.
Chair, can I come back?
Yeah, of course you can.
I support all of your points that you just said, just to make that very clear. I'm also after seeking reassurance from Homes England and Swale as a bigger organisation, that, for example, Homes England will actually see this as a priority and come and report back to committee on a more regular basis than every 23 years. And also that, for instance, we can finally ask whoever is looking at this to have that really transparent conversation with all members, all ward councillors, around 106 provision and how we can make the best of these agreements and have the maximum input from ward councillors to make sure that, where possible, the money is retained within the community where it's most needed. For example, not sending education money off the island for developments that are on the island, for example, but because people don't realise that what an academy is, which is crazy, but was actually a discussion within planning. So there's another reassurance that I'm seeking here to make sure that we're not going round in circles with those 106, to make sure they're really key positive points for these developments going forward, Chair. Thank you.
Do you want to pick up on that? Because that is our lived-in experience in Swale. That is precise point that Dolly's made there.
About 106.
About 106, and then the money either. Well, I mean, we've got the problem in Swale where the secondary school, Northwest Sittingbourne, has now been delayed for more than, I think it's 7 years now, because a commercial developer there and KCC have not agreed on a way forward. And that has caused an enormous educational problem on the island and within Sittingbourne. And what we cannot tolerate is a repeat of that, and especially by a government agency.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the difficulty is we're talking about the sort of things that are not necessarily detailed enough or fixed, but the point about appropriate Section 106 and where that goes, I mean, that obviously we will respond to Swale's requests, so that's I would push that back onto Swale as the LPA. Obviously they've got to be clear about what the 106 obligations are.
Are you having a discussion with KCC Education? So, I mean, that's the key. You're the developer effectively here, because what was clear in the Highstead Park inquiry is those discussions. And sorry, I had sat through months of this, and the last thing that was debated was a Section 106. And it was clear to me that the developer and KCC had not got their heads together and worked out the sequencing of educational facilities. And in that precise instance, there was more than one Section 106 agreement because there were two applications. And this comes down to your site, because how big is it? And if you're doing a detailed application, are you doing more than one application? Because potentially you could have more than one Section 106. And if they don't align and talk to each other, and there is no control over the timing of when each one will come about because something stalls on site, it's a car crash. That is, for us as an authority, that is a nightmare. And what happened was the wording was wrong. It got redrafted 5 times, and it took an outside interest group to point that out, because KCC could not read their own document, and neither could the applicant. And the planning inspector pointed out most recently another mistake. So it's imperative that discussion is had early doors, like now. Because there's no point talking to a developer if they then come, in KCC come along and run a horse and cart through, where you're going to put houses, because they say, well, we want a school somewhere else.
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair point, and we're having issues on other sites with school delivery, and it's a very challenging issue, just trying to predict where populations will be in 4 or 5 years' time, and we know that moves on an annual basis. But so some of the initial work that we've been doing is around trying to establish with KCC, what the likely requirements will be. Again, until it's a sort of chicken and egg situation, until we get some more detail about what a scheme might look like, and therefore what kind of projections there might be about pupils and things like that what does the actual ask look like. So it's that's why again we're keen to get to a position, because coming back to my point, a lot of this would be dealt with by the outline, which we are not proposing to do in this particular instance, because I just think it will delay things even further. And we're going to have to kind of do that work as part of the early engagement with a partner once they've got a scheme, once they've started to develop it, and then we can start having some of these more detailed conversations about what actual other infrastructure might look like, or Section 106 contributions. But the main point about what is appropriate and where will it go? I'll just refer back to my previous point that that's got to come from Swale. I just make the point, hopefully I can be as clear as I can be. I don't think anyone is saying that there won't be any apartments on this scheme and flats. So it's just the proportion. So where we was at 1,000 homes, there was I think, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, there might have been 40% apartments in that. I would have to caveat that and say I need to check numbers. It might have been 30. Anyway, it was a very high proportion. So we're not saying it won't form part of this scheme. If the scheme is developed and there's feedback and there's clear evidence that actually there is demand, great. Then okay, that will be fed into the scheme, and that will be fed into the design and the development of the application. So I just want to make, because I think that's probably the third time that's come up, I'm not sitting here saying that will not happen. Okay.
So just to be clear, from Swale's point of view, for obviously the less number of units you deliver, the more sites that Swale has to find elsewhere in the borough, and where you have a railway station, you've got the road infrastructure that you've invested there, and there is a bus services around there. It is really important that housing's delivered where that infrastructure, public infrastructure, is available, and that Homes England concentrates on that, because it causes us an enormous problem. It means we're developing on greenfields. It means around Sittingbourne, planning applications have gone through on appeal because you've not delivered on site. And if you're going to deliver even less, that will put even more pressure on us.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that point. I think just going back to, I think one of the things you were saying, and this comes back to the potential, what the mix of homes might look like. What we have seen on a large majority of our schemes is that part of the solution in terms of broadening the potential mix of tenures on site is around certainly the build to rent products, or PRS, the private rented sector, which is apartments but also houses, and it is about broadening the offer, so it's not just your standard sort of affordable rent, shared ownership, and then private sector housing. It's a broader mix of different tenure types, and we have, sometimes that's been our direction, that we've asked developers to specifically consider that, but what the market is doing is actually responding to that need, and we are seeing that pretty much universally on most of our schemes, that developers will be looking to do that anyway, and what they would call a partnership model, which is where they would partner up with other PRS providers, build to rent providers, as well as sometimes additional social housing and affordable housing. So we are seeing that pretty much across. So what we don't do is necessarily dictate that, but we'll see what the responses are, and then that will be part of the consultation. So as the scheme develops, if there's clearly a potential market for that, then that's something that will come into it. But I would say I could easily see that being part of the scheme.
So just to help you, we've got 65,000 households in Swale, of which 12,000 are privately rented, 8,000 are social rented, in round numbers. Is that right? That is, Joanne, isn't it, broadly speaking? Yeah. So that gives you a flavour of where we are in our numbers. Right, Dolly, sorry, I cut over you there. Is there anything else on your... She's finished, okay. I would give everyone everyone their third chance. Hold on. Right, Councillor Shield,
Hello, thank you. Can you
who
hear
is
me?
ward member, I'd like to point out as well. And part of the
you.
planning
Can
for
you hear me
real.
okay?
Yes, come in.
I do echo what you say. I do think we need to start banging on number 10's door. It was Steve Reed that was saying, build, baby, build, and we're not getting anything. Thank you for coming, Neil. And I think we need to separate what we've done and what's to come, because the Neats Court, the Link Road, you know, absolutely works. It was needed, and you know, it is fantastic. It's a good piece of development that we've got. We've got the infrastructure there, but we've not got any houses really. The Keep Moat development, absolutely rubbish. We're finally, I think, in the last probably 6 months, just had the final part of landscaping completed. But the whole site, to be fair, is an absolute mess. It doesn't fit in. It never did. It never will. And then we keep going on about this master plan. I think that whole master plan needs to be thrown in the bin. I don't know how Homes England can still sit there and say that they're going to deliver or keep going back to this master plan when we're cutting down the amount of houses we're delivering. So we cut the master plan down from the marina and everything else, and we've gone quite basic now, which is fair enough. That's the way, you know, the world's looking today. Let's just go for it. But we're still looking at building a school, a doctor's surgery, the Marine Creekside leisure thing with 500 houses. How much are we selling these 500 houses for to be able to afford all of the road, all of the infrastructure, the school, the Creekside leisure, the doctor's surgery? It doesn't add up. Mathematically, it does not add up. We're not going to get all of this for that price of 500 houses. And my question is, what happens to the rest of the site? So we find a developer in the next 18 months, they start building. We've got 500 houses. Perfect. But what happens to the rest of the site? We've kicked people out of businesses. We've lost part of our heritage for all of this grand development. And I always say at every meeting, and I'm going to have it on my headstone, we were promised a full bike and we're left with a bell. I don't even think we've got the inner tube anymore. I really don't. Because it's been scaled back so much that we're getting nothing. And I know there's been an awful lot in the road that's tripped us up. There's been an awful lot that's happened to the site, COVID and everything else. And they're not excuses, you know, it's the real world we're living in. Everything's there to trip us up. But considering we as the public have spent so much money on that site, I really do not know how government, be it my government, other people's government, can sit there and say that maybe this is good value for money if we're only building 500 houses. You know, if it's just cost us just over £6 million to land raise that current area, and we're going to get 500 houses out there. I really don't think we're getting value for money. We're not getting what the community was promised. And I know we keep saying we're going to look at the master plan, we're going to go back to the public, but there is only so much we can get for those 500 houses. And I do believe we need to be knocking on number 10's door and saying, look, you need to help fix this, because there's no point in us continuing this never-ending journey when we're getting nowhere. It just seems a waste of everybody's time at the moment. You know, for years we've been saying, no, we're getting there, we're getting there, we're getting there. Where are we getting there? You know, there seems to be no end in sight whatsoever. And my residents have been left for donkey's years walking and living next to a massive pile of mud. Yeah. And I can't go around and say to them, you know, we're going to start developing. Houses will be there in the next 2 years, because that's what we've been saying since 2003. And we're getting nowhere. Thank you, Chair.
Well done, Councillor Shill. I think that's very good. I totally agree. Hear, hear. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, so, in reference to the master plan, yeah, clearly, things have changed, but the fundamental principles about, quality and sustainability and placemaking, they're the things that I'm referring to say, they're the things that we want to take forward. So it's not necessarily, I totally accept that, the documents, hold and things have changed, but some of the fundamental principles of it are still remain, and they're the things that we need to try and draw out of the engagement with the developers. Yes, in terms of what the value for money, but I would say the total investment in this project, we mustn't forget that a large proportion of that was simply buying the land. It was paying for the road. It was paying for all of the infrastructure works that went in to provide Neates Court. So it's not a case of that money has been spent and you've only got 500 homes. What you've got is, a link road, 1 million square feet of employment space, 1,500 plus jobs, plus all the other utility and infrastructure upgrades that we put in as part of the road to service the eventual housing. So it's very important to remember that level of investment has delivered a lot of other things. It's not just about saying it's that much money and that equals 500 homes.
No, I totally get that, and Neates Court is a massive achievement for us. It is really good and it's really positive. But when we look at the most recent set of works we've got, when we look at the infrastructure money we got, that 6.1 million to land raise that area,
yeah,
that's an awful lot of money for 500 homes.
Yeah, I accept what you're saying. I think it's an indication though of I think just simply the economics of development, which are extremely challenging. And one of the reasons, I think the previous question about why has things happened in other parts, fundamentally we didn't have a proposition that we was able to go to the market with because it wasn't the works, the prep works hadn't been completed to a stage that enabled us to have something that was fixed to be able to go out and say, okay, here's the site, here's all of the constraints, this is what you've got to work with. They're constantly moving. And sorry, just coming back to the other point about there's always the opportunity to raise raise the point further afield about is there something else that we could be doing? Is there more investment that you could put in? I would just say that if a point of view is that it's not good value for money now, I'm not sure the answer is necessarily putting more money in. It's being about creative about how we get to the position of having a development partner. I think simply saying it needs more money, I would just sort of spin the question around and say, but to spend on what is it that we think that we could spend more money on to deliver this quicker? Coming back to the fundamental point that in the experience of other schemes, the thing underpinning all of this has always been what's the developer paid for the site. And I'll come back to that sort of analogy that, if you've paid, 5 million, 10 million for a site, it's then very difficult economically to make it work and stack up. And that's where sometimes that, you get the pushback and say, well, we can't afford to do X, Y, and Z. We're trying to work here in reverse, where we're trying to say, this is everything we're trying to achieve. And ultimately that then informs what, if anything, a developer might be able to pay for the land. We have the ability to be a bit more flexible, we have an ability to be a lot more flexible about that and a bit more creative about how we structure our agreement in order to help deliver the wider objectives because that's not the situation that they're starting from. So they're not coming in and saying, we know that we have to pay X for this site. The site is worth what it's worth if you're delivering all of these objectives.
Councillor Shield, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think we could be here all night bouncing backwards and forwards. I do think though we need to see real progress, you know, and I think for me, and maybe it's not my committee, but throwing it on your doorstep, sorry, Monique.
That's all right.
Maybe we need to push for, as Dolly said, more regular updates and keep pushing, you know, this. And maybe it needs to be a question that I submit to the leader, that maybe we write to the Secretary of State number 10 and say, you know, help push this more. You know, if it isn't money, there's got to be something they can do to help move this development on. You know, we're supposed to be the government that are building. You know, we're being told Britain needs houses, our community needs houses, and that site has sat empty since 2003. You know, we cannot be saying we need houses, we need to build, we need land, when we've got land ready to be built on. We're just not really acting on it. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the question that springs to mind out of that, Neil, is what can you do to address the appearance of the site? Because it's clear nothing is going to happen on site for at least another 2 years. You know, bearing in mind these poor residents have sat next to this building site for the last 20 odd years. Is there anything you can do? Because, you know, responsible landowners quite often will do things like planting and landscaping around the perimeter, which will help with your BNG, especially if you've done your baseline calculations. You can say you've already, you know, you've done certain amounts since X point.
Yeah, look, and just going back to the previous summary, I think I said I'm not going to sit here and defend the overall position. You know, this. I've tried to put it in some context about the challenges, but ultimately, you know, this site sat here for way too long, and we need to get on with it, and we need to do something, and we are trying to do that. What can be done in the interim, I'll have to take back, and we'll have a look. But I take your I take your point.
You know, when we've been out on site, you look at the fencing, you look at the quality of the fencing, etc. There's things that can be done that don't cost the earth, but is a gesture of goodwill to the poor community. I say poor because I feel sorry for them, and they've had to live next door to this eyesore for so long. You know, there is something as well about dragging an area down, and actually you're demolishing your own values, your own site values, by pulling the area down. You know, there might be those that want to invest in their properties nearby but don't feel motivated to do so all the time. They've got this carbuncle next to their properties, and it pulls down investment in the wider area for us, I think, is the thought. So, you know, if that is something you can take away and seriously look at and consider, that I think would be welcomed.
Yeah.
Okay, right, members. I'm conscious that Neil has been on the ropes for a while. He's still got a while to go yet, unfortunately, because we're getting through them. But Councillor Braun, did you indicate to speak? You did a while ago, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to bring you in. Then I've got Councillor Moore, and then I've got Councillor Braun, Councillor Clark, and Councillor Moore, and then Councillor Winter. You've got a little one, and I know Councillor Harrison you indicated. And is there anyone else to go on the list that I've not? Right, okay, that's fine. Right, do you want to take 5-10 minute break? Get a drink?
Well, the thing is Neil going to escape?
No, he's. I think it'd just give you a few minutes to recover. Yes, like that. 5-10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay, so we're just going to adjourn for 10 minutes. So if I can get you back here for 9:05. Evening, members. I think we are reconvening now. Okay, if you all take your places. Right, let's get back to my list. So, Councillor Braun, I think you were next on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to quickly sort of draw attention to the fact that Sheppey is a deprived area, or there are pockets of deprived areas on Sheppey. In my area of Sheerness, the life expectancy in part of Sheerness is 72 years for a male. This scheme, just a little bit younger than I am. I'm 24. That's a third of my lifetime, according to life expectancy. What's gone wrong here, apart from all these issues like COVID? Because there's clearly something else that has to have gone wrong for it to get to this point, where the revised numbers are a quarter of the initial plan. And just one of the key points behind that life expectancy is quality of housing. Why are we struggling to see through this scheme that has so many agencies involved in it? You know, one of them being your agency, one of them being this council. Surely those are the two biggest people you should need involved. We've got to a point where there's 110 homes delivered, which, mind you, if we keep revising it down, the percentage of the scheme that's gone through keeps going up and up. So, you know, delivery, I suppose. And just also the fact that, sure, you can look at Neats Court, which is great. You can look at the road, which is great. The public aren't going to see that. What they're going to see when the other 400 homes get built, they're going to look at the final cost. They're not going to associate the other stuff with it because it happened so long ago. And they're going to think, sorry, how much for 500 homes? And that is a reputational risk for everyone. Ridiculous.
Okay, Neil, do you want to try and answer that one?
Yeah, people won't forget because I'll keep reminding them. Don't worry. But no, yeah, it's taken too long. I can't sit here and say anything else. All I would say is I know, and again, if you look at the headlines, I think it looks worse. But the first acquisition was 2003. The last acquisition was probably 2012, I think. So it took nearly 10 years to acquire all of the land interests, simply to get to a point where you had a cohesive ownership that you could do something with. The planning process was run alongside that and didn't conclude until 2013. So I'm not defending the amount of time this has taken, absolutely, and I think I've made that clear. I think it's just obviously when we put it into context about when things have happened, and the challenges that we've had along the way, it's part of the way to explain and justify why it's taken so long. But ultimately, the answer is it shouldn't have taken this long.
Can I? There's a question popped up from another councillor, and it's probably the right time to bring it in. Which is there any update on the rolling mill site?
So that's all part of it. It's all part of Queenborough.
Is it acquired and it's all done and dusted? Is it?
Yeah. So that's the bit to the east of Rushendon Road, adjacent to the roundabout, which takes you down into Cullet Drive. So that was the old rolling mill site. That obviously we acquired that some time ago, and the site prep works and the land raise has been completed on that element as well. So that forms part of all of the overall site that we're talking about now.
Okay. Is that answered all your questions? Okay, that's lovely. Right. Then I had Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. You know me, I'm as blunt as a baseball bat. And I'll try not to insult our guests too much. It all seems a problem in this country that everything takes so long from conception to inception. You take the Danes or one of the Scandinavian countries, they've built the longest underground tunnel in the world. It came in before time and under budget. The Spanish have built, or the EU are building infrastructure through the Alps. It's on time and on budget. We get the Lower Thames crossing. That's going to be, another 6 years before that's finished, and it's probably going to be, I don't know, $1 billion or $2 billion over budget. You get Highstead Valley, the Highstead Park development. If it gets planning permission, that's going to be built out over 20 years. 20 years, which is absolutely ridiculous. Look at this page on the back of this sheet. All these other countries have had COVID to deal with. They've had biodiversity, which is probably more sensitive, or as sensitive, if not more sensitive, than some of our biodiversity to deal with. So I take those points with an absolute pinch of salt. And I come back to the fact that you're now going to start. You spent the HIF money, or the HIF money was completed. The funding works were completed in 2022. So you've had 3.5 years to consult with developers and bring this scheme forward and get spades in the ground. And now you're saying that there's going to be another round of consultation. I think probably the people of Queenborough and Rushendon are sick of consultation. They just want the spades in the ground, and it's going to be another 18 months before the planning permission comes through and goes before committee, before you even consider getting any spades in the ground. I find this absolutely, frustrating at best, diabolical at worst. There's not really a question in it, but I'm just saying, really, your agency needs to, how can I put this, get off their backsides and start delivering. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's go on to Councillor Moore, who's patiently waiting online.
Yeah, thank you. Not really much about what's gone on and everything. This is more, I think you touched on it, regarding the education situation. I think I can agree all well and truly that we need to build houses and everything, but when do we put the health and well-being of the residents of these houses before, anything else? There are children on the island that haven't got a school. Still nearly a year ago, haven't got a school place, and we're talking about healthy living and, this, we're doing all this for the future generations. What future are they going to have? What employment are they going to have if they haven't got an education? This isn't just a, we've got to make sure that there's a school in 20 years' time. This is children now. What world are we living in where in 2026 children can't get an education because, everywhere's been overbuilt and no infrastructure's been put. I think it's great that we've got the employment of Neats Court and everything, but I think before you look at anything, you've got to look at putting where you're going to put another secondary school before you look at more houses. And I know we need the houses, but are people going to want to live in these houses if their children aren't going to get an education?
And I think, Councillor Moore, I think what's critical there is around the timing of delivery, because KCC would take into account anything that's in the local plan and would forecast forwards according to the expectation of delivery. And that then causes a delivery issue elsewhere in the borough, doesn't it, for education? So
yeah, but it does.
Rushenden being held up here has caused a knock-on effect, because that educational request hasn't been, shall we say, actioned. So carry on, Councillor Moore.
It wasn't for a secondary school, was it? I mean, the newest secondary school is the one, I think, in Iwade, which you say has been put back.
Yeah.
But, you know, the children are getting sent to Faversham from the far end of the island.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, adding houses closer to the schools, with the existing schools, puts pressure on the children that can't access the schools anyway.
Yeah.
And it puts pressure on Sittingbourne, and it puts pressure on Faversham. I just really want to reiterate, and I know I sound like a broken record saying it, but, you know, there is no healthy families and healthy communities when children aren't getting their education. You know, parents can't work and then are punished because they can't work, because they can't get an income, because they're having to try and home educate their children because they can't get a school. You know, nurses that I know, you know, have had to give up, you know, work to educate their children. And that's what situation we're in on the island at the moment. And it's only going to get worse. So I think, you know, even with an extra 500 houses, although it was meant to be 2,000 or whatever, with what we've already got starting to be built as well, it's a massive pressure.
And, well, the consequence of this not delivering has meant that other housing on the islands come forward in a much quicker time frame.
Yeah.
So it's unhinged those plans for education. It's unhinging the plans for health is the consequence.
Yeah, and I just, like I say, I may sound like a broken record on it, living the experience of it all personally. And I just want to, I will keep bringing it up until we get something sorted about it.
Okay, so we can ask that point is taken away specifically, because that really has a fundamental impact. And we've got a live issue right now in Sheerness around a GP surgery.
Yeah.
And so Homes England are aware, Swale has taken a 20 million funding bid for levelling up, it's now government funding. It was going to entirely refurb and create the space for an existing GP surgery. And that GP surgery is now not sure whether it wants to continue that operation. And the ICB is looking at how that's dealt with. But what we know is that if you haven't got a critical mass of residents, then that GP facility will not come forward, or any expansion of it. So if you do not have enough residents, so if you reduce the number of residents that in a planned development, then actually the health facility that may come forward may never come forward now. And that is really critical. So this undermines the ability to deliver education, health, etc., with other partner agencies if that is taken out of the local plan. Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's the eastern end of the island are losing a satellite doctor's surgery as well.
Yeah.
You know, where the places that most need it are the ones that are losing out on everything, and we really need to reiterate that with every planning decision, you know, we make.
Yep. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Councillor Moore?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Right, I have now gone back to, actually, I'm going to bring forward Councillor Thompson, and then I'll bring in Councillor Whiting and Councillor Harrison.
I'm out of touch. I can't seem to get anything on here. What was the school and the surgery number sizes that are proposed, and are they secondary or
primary?
Primary.
So maybe you want to clarify what was.
I just wanted to get.
under your master plan?
So originally, it was there was space reserved in the master plan for the provision of I think it was a 2FE primary school. I think just going back to the previous point as well about the need for primary, secondary health facilities. Clearly, I'll come back to the point that we need to get the scheme, and then we can start having those detailed. What does the scheme look like, and what is the offer, and what is the proposal? Obviously, we have to react to whatever KCC is telling us in terms. So it's not for us to promote the school necessarily, unless that is the requirement of the development and of KCC. So that's where I go back to the chicken and egg situation. We need to bring the scheme forward to say, okay, what does it look like? What are the numbers? That will then feed into obviously the KCC assessments, and then that will produce the answer about what is required. The same really with the GP. I would just point out I've been involved in 2 separate schemes where we set aside a site for a school, and then we were told it wasn't needed, and we built a building for a GP surgery that then said they didn't want it. So these things are very difficult to pin down because of the length of time it takes in planning and building it to actually get to the point where someone says, oh, actually we don't need that anymore, which is obviously hugely frustrating and a waste of money. But I'm just saying it is a very difficult thing to pin down, but that is the point about getting to have a scheme that we can have the detailed discussions and then say, okay, what is the need? What is the, what does this look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years time? And how can this scheme help deliver that?
Which is why whatever you do, it's critical it's properly reflected in the local plan, because that is the purpose of a local plan, because KCC will have developed their educational plan based on what is in our plan currently, and that is currently over 1,000 properties. If that is now reducing significantly, then, as I said, that does that undermines the provisional requirements there for many, not just for education, but for many services. Okay. Would you like to come back? Anything you got to ask?
It was only in terms of numbers, and
yeah,
obviously it was just a vagary of just a school and a surgery, but no. No. Okay. Thanks.
Right, next, Councillor Whiting.
I'm grateful for letting me come back. I had a point that I've got 3 quick points to make. The first one is something that Neil mentioned, that the viability, if you like, of dense development is less now than it was, and developers are looking, and you're looking also. They're more viable if there's lower development. I'm just looking through a densification report that goes to our policy planning transportation. It's basically the local plan working group meeting next week, and we've made assumptions about density that have informed the whole plan viability moving forward, and we're looking at things between 30 and 60 dwellings per hectare. The figures you've given us are 10 properties per hectare at best. Well, 500 over. I've worked out. We had probably say 80 hectares of developable land.
Yeah, no, it's a lot less than
that. What is it?
I'll have to come back to your number, but it's a lot less than that.
It's a lot less than, but it's a lot less than 60 per hectare, isn't it?
No, I'm not gonna. I can't give you a number now, but I would say it is within that range, because when you actually take into account land that needs to be set aside for BNG, land that needs to be set aside for open space, potential land take for community school provision, whatever it ends up being, your actual developable area is a lot less than that.
Okay. Well, I think it just run a red flag for me that that we were talking here
considerably more.
That developers are just refusing to get involved in things that are going to involve high densities, if that's what you're suggesting, which gives them an awful lot of ammunition when it comes to our public, the inquiry in public into our local plan, for them to come back and say, well, what you're asking at 60 per hectare isn't actually good for us, and we don't know where Swale have got those numbers from. What you're saying is that you're somewhere between 30 and 60, and
I think it would.
But perhaps you could come back and let us know, Neil. The other 2 points, and it may help move things forward, Chair, because we've been asked, or the committee, I'm not a voting member, of course, but we've been asked to note the position. But could I suggest, because out of the discussion, that we actually, somebody proposes and votes to formalise the position with regards to the development agreement, to sort of back up what the officers are already doing, which is having those discussions with Homes England, and take some vote to not instruct, but certainly sort of give them a foundation and a basis, a formal one, for them to take those discussions forward. And the second point, Kevin McKenna, the MP, phoned me up last night to talk about a lot of all this. And I asked him then whether he'd prepared to arrange a meeting with the chief exec at Homes England, Amy Rees, and the relevant minister, and the local members, to go through all of this and see, just to try to ensure we give it one last stab at allowing Queenborough to get what it wants and what it is expecting. And taking up Councillor Wisey's point, there's a trusting here. People were expecting stuff and they're being told they can't have it. And it's been mentioned a couple of times tonight, taking this a bit higher. Kevin said he's quite happy to arrange that meeting, which is very encouraging. So, which is good. So there's 2 ways forward, really. I think first thing, we get Kevin to arrange that meeting, and I'm happy to go back to him. I said I'd go back to him after this and let him know. Because after what I've heard tonight, I think is even more important that the chief exec and the minister understands really more fully what's going on here. And then also that just underpinning the officers' discussions about the development agreement. And I think a motion from your committee chair would give them a firmer foundation on which to do that. Sorry, thank you.
Okay. Actually, if I'll ask you a question as you've brought that to us. Now then, ending the agreement, obviously we heard about ending the agreement because A, it's an embarrassment, and it is marking your own homework and shooting yourself in the foot all at the same time. Whilst it continues, we have a stake. When that ends, we do not have a stake. We just become merely the planning committee. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So my question back to you is actually, if we prolong that agony of having that agreement in place, we still have a stake and we still have a discussion. Now, are they likely to default us? Would seem a bit bizarre, wouldn't it, that they would default us on their own land where we haven't got the right to actually develop out, because that is the scenario. But we can bring them to the table to have a discussion all the time. That is live. So it is rushing slowly sometimes, because the longer you're a thorn in their side, then the more action they might take, possibly. But I'll let other committee members have a think on that.
I merely proposed, sort of made a suggestion.
Yes.
And I take the point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is quite, there's still a lot of paddling under the water for the officers to keep monitoring the agreement and doing all the other stuff and having the legal discussions about it, which is a cost to the council, both in resources and in money. So.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Can I just come back?
Yes, of course.
There's just a couple of bits. I suppose just to clarify, it's not a blanket statement to say that density doesn't increase value. It's very site specific. So when you've got a challenging site in terms of, so particularly in terms of sales values, once you start getting above 3 stories on an apartment block, it doesn't become cost effective. It costs you more to build than it does you could generate in sales. So it's not a blanket So if there are other sites that you're looking at and actually you're talking about densities, that is definitely a solution. If also you can address the issue about car parking standards, for example. So, obviously, again, if you have to build apartments and you have to build car parking spaces, that's land take. If you have to go down into a basement, that costs a lot of money. So that's the economics of apartments, that it's not a blanket, and it's not a blanket about densities. So just to clarify, I was talking specifically about where sites have challenging viability. Just on the point about raising this up, just to let you know, there is so we're sort of we're having a small regional restructure where our old South region, which used to cover everything from Norfolk and basically a diagonal line across to Bristol and everything below that, excluding London, used to be our South region, and now that's been split into two. So the East region is basically everything north of the Thames, so Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Norfolk, Suffolk, etc. And then the South region is effectively a straight line from Kent, vaguely following the M4 corridor and everything south of that. So we have a new executive regional director, Kate McBride. And she's obviously, it's a senior appointment. So she is in post now. So I would just say, obviously, there is a level of engagement there that you may want to consider, or Mr. McKenna may want to consider. In addition to that, we've just appointed Alison Crofton was our Chief Property Officer. She's now our Chief Regional Delivery Officer. It's a similar role, but obviously it's heading up that new regional structure. She's the chief. I had to Google it just to make sure I got it right.
Yeah.
Chief Regional Delivery Officer.
Chief Regional Delivery.
So in terms of hierarchy, it goes. Kate is the exec sort of regional director. Alison sits on the board as the Chief Regional Delivery Officer, so she's responsible for all of the regions across the country. And then obviously Amy is at the top of the tree, and I'm somewhere near the bottom. So if I'm just flagging it up. So obviously there are different entry level points for raising the whole project. Obviously you guys feel free to make whatever contacts you need to.
Thank you. I welcome that. Okay, Councillor, is that you're happy with your?
Thank you for that.
Okay, Councillor Harrison. Oh.
Thanks, Chair. The number of times I've sat in this chamber and listened to, we don't need any more houses, we want infrastructure, we don't need more, on and on and on and on and on about we don't need more houses. And yet tonight, it's when are we going to go get the houses? It warms the cockles of my heart, as they say. I am aware of a number of the challenges that we have had with this scheme over the years. Well, perhaps not with this scheme, but maybe if I just say with the politics and leave it at that. But let's not forget, and I said it earlier, that we said when this master plan came forward, it should be the blueprint, the infrastructure, the employment, and then housing last of all. And let us not forget, we got the Rushendon Relief Road out of the work that Neil and his people did. We got the Rushendon Relief Road while Kent County Council and indeed Swellborough Council were saying, you ain't got a cat in hell's chance of getting that Rushendon Relief Road because it isn't even on our horizon as a priority. It is nothing to us. And this scheme delivered that link road, which the people of Rushendon and Queenborough and further afield had been asking for years and years and years. That wasn't a tuppence halfpenny job. And then the work which I forgot his name, Austin Neil, did for you in the warehouse in terms of training people for jobs. There are people in Rushenden who are in employment now and have been since that time because of the work which this scheme did in terms of providing training for employability. And that is a long-lasting lifetime thing. So let's not just say, oh, you've got the road and the retail park and then, well, nothing else. Awful lot of work, high value work in my view, giving somebody a job for life or skills for a job for life is not to be sniffed at. And I think that we should not dismiss lightly the work that was done at the time. As I say, I know some of the problems that we've had since then and now. What I would say to Neil is this. Number one, housing needs survey, which Swale Borough Council does every year or so. You don't even need to ask Swale Borough Council, do you? Because it's part of that government up there. Different hand. I know the left hands and the right hands and all the rest of it. But we do submit a housing needs survey so that they know what our needs are. And that will give you a better understanding than the developer saying, I can't make much money out of that. I can only make tuppence halfpenny, so I'm telling you there ain't a need. Our staff, who are quite independent, actually, they just collect the data, will be able to advise on what is best for that area. If I recall correctly, the apartment blocks around the marina, well, were not for, one-bed properties. The apartment blocks around that marina were what you were talking about, $1 million plus. Executive apartments. That was what they were about. There are properties in Sheerness that is a minimum $500,000. There's a couple of rows of them, actually. So, yeah, there is, money is there and that would be a lovely sea view. But the final point, I think, on my little list here is I'm not sure that we... Kevin can go and talk to whoever Kevin wants to go and talk to. I'd much rather have don't take offence. I'd rather have the monkey than the organ grinder, frankly. The person who's getting on with the job, because all the time he's wasting his time reporting, Kevin wants a report on this, Kevin wants a report on that. We want a meeting. You're taking it away from the day job. I mean, I know this because we've had it with our staff over the years. I would rather that, Neil, if you can, come up with a programme of liaison with our staff, and then when you feel you will have some milestones to report to this committee, not 23 years apart, obviously, but, you will know each milestone. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is, I've got all these in, we're going out to tender. Right, we need to have the members in to say, this is roughly what we've got. What do you think? Not giving you names and pack drills, but give us your feelings, that sort of thing. So not like come along every month, because I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But when you've got appropriate milestones, because I know that you do talk to our officers. Probably talk to Kieran, who's really good. But I think sometimes members do like to see the whites of the eyes of the people that we're working with. And my views on that. It's a fantastic opportunity, and let's get the best out of it that we can. And I would just thank you for sticking with it all these years, because I know it wasn't easy, but I appreciate it, and I'm sure ultimately residents on the island will. So thank you very much.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that at all?
So the housing needs survey is a good, valid point. And I think just on the sort of reporting or feedback, if I can take that away and maybe have a discussion, with officers about what format that might take, whether it's a subgroup, working group, or I'm not sure, but I think we're open to some ideas about the best route doing that. So, but the main point about more regular touch points is accepted. So,
I mean, to help you out here, if you look at 1 and 2 bedrooms, the need for 1 bedrooms is between 5 and 10%, and 2 bedrooms is between 35 and 40%. So you can see that that's a large proportion is on the smaller end of the scale. So that's why we're questioning, about the delivery of larger properties. So, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms plus. So I think that really does need to be looked at carefully. You ask a developer what they can deliver, it'll only be what the most profitable is, quite frankly, because that's what they're in it for. At the end of the day, they're there to make a profit, unless they're a social housing provider, and you're probably looking to make a profit so that you can subsidise your social rented. So, yes, come in, Joanne.
Thank you. Just a suggestion, shall I pop this on the forward plan with something like at an appropriate trigger point, as we do with some of our ones that we know are coming in the future, but we just have them there so they're in our minds, without putting a date to it, but just putting it needs a trigger, and then it will come back and we can work in the background as to what those triggers are.
Okay, right. Have we got any more questions for Neil? Because then what I'll do is I'll focus us on our paper that's here. So anyone want to ask anything specific? Oh, sorry, you did indicate. Councillor Clark, come in.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick plea, really, Neil. You've said about obviously the cost of delivering flatted dwellings. As has been said a lot in the chamber this evening, we do need smaller properties, which may not be as profitable for a developer as a 4 or 5 bedroom executive box. But there is another need, I feel, and it's a need that developers don't seem to want to take on board, and that is the need for bungalows. People just do not build bungalows anymore. And when bungalows come up for sale, I'm not, probably Councillor Harrison and others will tell me better, but in Sittingbourne, when a bungalow comes up, be it 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom or whatever, they go, like yesterday, they literally go on the market one day and they're gone within 2 days. They're purchased. So there is a need there for bungalows as well. So when you start looking at talking with your developers, can I ask that you broach that particular subject with them to see if they will put some bungalows within the mix? Thank you.
Okay. Right, last call for questions. Okay, right. So, thank you for allowing us to put you on the ropes tonight. Appreciate it. As you'll understand, there's quite a lot of frustration, and I think that's rightly so, because of the position we find ourselves in. It's a really unfortunate position that the council doesn't have many levers in this situation, other than the contractual position that we find ourselves in, which seems to be around, and the reason for that was because Homes England didn't really want to play VAT on that, and they could claim it back. So I think there is a lot of accountability here from Homes England to deliver on their promises. I think what we've seen is at least 2 iterations now of a master plan, which obviously have not been delivered. There is little trust now between the council, the community and Homes England to carry this forward in a timely fashion, given where we are. But I do hope that Homes England can take away the points that we've made tonight and action some of those, not least the condition of the site as it currently stands in the immediate future, but to then resolving what will be delivered on site and not to fall to the developers as to what they may or may not feel they can deliver. And they will always be conservative at the outset. And you will know that from how you've delivered projects previously. If I can just ask you to hang on whilst we just debate what the paper in front of us, that'll be, I should imagine, quite swift. But I think there's some actions that we want aside from noting this report tonight. It's clear, I think, that we need actions from it. So if I look at my little list here, where I've been scribbling, I think, first of all, we would like, if you can, quite swiftly come back, clarifying what you were looking at in terms of densities in your assessments on site. We'd also like to have a proposal of what you're going to do in the immediate future to tidy up the site and the appearance of it. And if we can ask you, so my proposal tonight is that we ask for Homes England to clarify the density of development they're expecting on the site, a proposal, an action plan of what they plan to do to tidy up the site, and then, and we'll have to debate what we're going to do about the agreement, but that we have a discussion, and I think it should be with the Chief Executive of Homes England and the Minister, probably someone from Treasury, and the Housing Minister. We need to have those direct discussions about investment in this site. So those are the three clear actions we need, and I propose that as a... Does someone second that? Do you want... All right, Councillor Thompson, we'll get you to second that. But if you would like to then, now it's been seconded, discuss that, and if you want to add to it, what you want to do in terms of an agreement, how quickly you want to rush on finalising the agreement. Councillor Gibson.
I would like Joanne's advice on her view on the bizarre four-way relationship agreement where three of the relationships are all Homes England, and how quickly you would like in or out of that.
Joanne.
Okay, thank you. Difficult question. We have been working to extricate ourselves from it at pace because of all the idiosyncrasies around it that lead us to believe it is unenforceable and therefore not the right position for us to be in. I think with my operational duties hat on, I should still work at pace to extricate us from something that is meaningless. That is my instant advice. I am happy to reflect on that advice should members wish me to do so, but that's my initial thoughts on that. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Happy with that, and that is my instinct as well. Any situation where I can't even now remember how to explain all of the intricated relationships of who the fining body also agreeing to us leaving the relationship with them that they have failed to deliver on in a separate capacity. Does not sound like a healthy working relationship. And if we can not be in it, that seems positive.
Okay. Anyone else wish to come in? Councillor Wise?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I did quite like the phrase rushing slowly. Also quite liked the bike and bell analogy. There's a few things there this evening that I'll be taking away. It's difficult to want to really debate that because, as Councillor Gibson has put forward, it is such a bizarre situation for us to be in, and I do take the comments that Councillor Whiting made about it earlier and how our officers are spending their time. And actually, for me, what I'm more concerned about that we action from this evening is the other proposals that you've put forward, because I would like as much attention from our officers and from members to be on those.
Yeah.
And us making sure that the offer needs to go out to the people that you listed for us to try to bring them to the table and seek their involvement in getting the best possible that we can from this site. And to that end, I'm very happy to support those. Whether we get a meeting is another matter, but I really would like us to push on that, because I just think, as Councillor Harrison said, we're seeing agreement here this evening that we want to see this site used to its fullest and maximum potential. And so in a roundabout way, if we're able to make sure our officer time is focused on that rather than on monitoring this mess, then that's fine by me.
Yes. So my proposal didn't include anything about the agreement, so I think we probably leave it from your feedback. If there are any other nods or... but the officers heard about how we might tackle it. So, okay, yes. So you can do all your work behind the scenes on the agreement. Right, anyone else? Anyone? All Phil, you've said everything? Those online? Right, fine. Okay, we'll take a vote on that. So we're all agreed on the amended proposal? Okay, great. And then we'll leave it to the officers to put a time frame on when they come back, but I'd say in the next couple of months. Okay, and it's going on the forward agenda. Fine. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Meeting is concluded, 21:51. Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil, for coming along. Appreciate it.